After a safe week 4, we'll break down week 5 in NFL Survivor, which offers 3 intriguing options. And we'll go over them coming up next. Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Lee.
I'm Michael Wiley, and we're the Fantasy Football Consultants. Eric, you made it out to the game. Tell us a little bit of how it was out there in Santa Clara.
I'm still smiling, so everything went great. I had great seats. It was just a fun, great game. Never was worried about a Niner victory. Didn't even have to do a battle plan about how I was going to rush the field if things got bad. So, no, it was great. Christian McCaffrey was incredible, 4 touchdowns. So how did everyone else do in our pool?
Well done, Eric. So we lost 2. One to the Steelers, and the other one was to no pick. And this time, we might actually think it had a little bit to do with the London game. So just a friendly reminder to our fans, the game's locked. The first game of the day, which, again, this coming Sunday, is a game in London time. So be sure to basically do it on Saturday night.
Although there are 3 really intriguing games, we'll go over the 6 that I think that'll probably be the most popular. Miami is 10.5-point favorites at home against the Giants. Detroit, 8.5-point favorites at home against Carolina. Washington's also at home, 6.5 over Chicago. And then 2 teams that are highly thought of, Buffalo and Kansas City. Both of them are 5.5-point favorites over Jacksonville and Minnesota. But I'd like to start with this game, Michael. Cincinnati, 3-point favorites at Arizona. You know, please, I want to hear your opinion on this Cincinnati Bengals game. This is the game I thought I was going to pick for week 5 at the beginning of the season. But after 4 weeks, I have zero trust in the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, no, they look like they kind of, shook off the rust in game 3. And I think it was tempting to think that they were going to come back out in game 4 and look strong, and no, they're still rust. A lot of rust there, both sides of the ball. A little bit kind of head scratching on what's going on with Coach Taylor over there. You're right. I don't think this is so much that there's more confidence in Arizona than before, although I will say that they have shown some fight. It really is this question of when are the Bengals going to show up at some point this season? I think they will. They're not there yet. So save them for when they will finally get there, because they're not there right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think Joe Burrow is 100% healthy when I watched it that he plays. And someone who is not healthy at all is one of his chief weapons, T. Higgins, who almost surely will be out this game. So speaking of being out this game, I'm out this game. I'm not picking the Bengals. Let's move on. We got Buffalo and Kansas City. I'd like to talk about them together. My basic opinion on them is, A, you either have already picked them, or if you have not, save them. Their future value is so much higher against 2 teams I respect, Jacksonville and Minnesota. They're inconsistent, but they can play well. And let me talk a little bit about that London game. Buffalo has to travel to London. Jacksonville was already there last week. So how much of an effect do you think that might be as an advantage to Jacksonville?
Buffalo's East Coast team, and it does help to come from the East Coast to go over to London. But I think it's helpful. And Jacksonville looked pretty good this last week. They got woke up the week before from a Houston team that's better than we all thought. And so, Buffalo coming off the big win against Miami, they obviously look really good. It's not a home game for Buffalo, folks. It's in London. Like you say, Jacksonville's already there. Save them. If you have them, save them.
So this brings us up to the 3 premium games. We got Miami, Detroit, and Washington. Miami and Detroit, look, if you're looking for a victory this week and that's all you care about, that is clearly the safest route. And in my opinion, Washington is a much more dangerous pick, but Washington has no future value. So that's the big picture of what's going on. Let's get into each team. Talk to me about this Washington 6.5-point favorites at home against Chicago. This is a Thursday night game, folks. So Michael told you about getting your picks in on time. If you want this game, you're going to have to pick it before that 5 minutes before that Thursday night game. How do you break this game down?
Well, so I mean, that Bears team, we saw the battle of the worst with Denver against Chicago. It looked like Chicago was going to win. I think they were up 28-7 at some point, and then the unplanned Chicago Bears offense kind of showed up. I mean, that team, you kind of wonder to what extent they actually have a game plan. I'm not very impressed with Eberflus at this point. Fields showed some strength. They have some weapons. I feel so. If you watch the Commanders Eagles game that went into overtime, you had to be impressed by that game, and they had it won. I'm surprised they didn't go for two. I thought Ron Rivera for sure was going to go for two to end that game, but they got the ball and they started to march the ball down the field. And you thought somehow Howe would put it together. The Commanders are clearly a better team than the Bears, who still haven't won a game since October of last year. But we've seen the Commanders lay eggs, and Howe is still an unproven quantity.
So this is why I think Survivor is so fun and interesting. Everybody has their own strategy. My strategy is conservative at the beginning of the season until you can feel like you get the lay of the land. So we've gotten through 4 weeks. Teams are now going on bye weeks now, so there are less options. I feel like I have the lay of the land that the Chicago Bears are the worst team in the NFL. So it is absolutely intriguing to go here because you got the worst team in the NFL, Chicago, on the road. Yes, Justin Fields looked pretty good, I got to admit, against the Denver Broncos, the same Denver Broncos that let Tua, Mike White, and anyone else in the Dolphins uniform roll over them for 70 points. Talk to me a little bit about this Washington defense. I personally am impressed by their front line, their defensive line with Chase Young and company. It's their secondary that has just been getting burned by big plays, which happened in that Eagles game. This Commander team has given up a lot of points.
And I did a little research on this game because it's one that I wanted to pay attention to. The Commanders are a stronger man defense than most, and that hurt them against the Eagles, because not only do they have AJ Brown, they have Devonta Smith, and even Goddard posed some challenges for them. So they couldn't just kind of isolate the strong offensive player and then let their man coverage kind of work from there. They got beat up by it. Well, guess what? This Chicago Bears offense doesn't really have. Yeah, DJ Moore has some talent, but the rest of that offense is not able to really break man coverage. So I just don't think we're going to see AJ Brown running wild like he did this week, because he's not on the Bears, and Justin Fields is not as accurate as Jalen Hurts.
I am a little concerned to make sure to follow the injury news. They have two wide receivers, Dotson and Curtis Samuel, who are questionable. I think Dotson's going to play. He came back in that game after getting hurt to score that tying touchdown. But look, 29 for 41, 291 yards against a very good Philadelphia defense, especially defensive line. That's impressive to me. So definitely one to consider. Anything else before we move on?
No, I think that if you just look at the matchup, kind of the Hosses, in the trenches, this game does lean towards the Commanders. They should win this game. It's just I don't see the Commanders running away from anyone, including the Bears. And so it will be closer than, it's not going to be like you felt at the Niners game this last week. It'll be uncomfortable, I think, throughout.
All right, let's go to Detroit. They are 8.5-point favorites at home against the winless Carolina Panthers. There's a lot to like about this Detroit Lion team. I think we both talked about the beginning of the year how good we think this team is. And I was always hesitant to pick Detroit before they got one of their key weapons. And guess what? Jamison Williams is going to make his debut.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to be a huge effect, Michael, but hey, that's another weapon that they're going to have. And they should be a well-rested team. We talked about it last week when the Niners played Thursday, the week before, coming with a lot of rest. This Detroit Lion team comes with a lot of rest. What do you think about this Detroit-Carolina game?
Yeah, so Detroit coming off the Thursday game that didn't necessarily paid huge dividends last night for the Giants, who had even a longer rest. But it should pay well for David Montgomery, who got like 1 million carries last Thursday and, ruined everybody's fantasy who went up against him. And Jahmyr Gibbs, I think, is ready for a breakout this week. So Carolina is kind of disappointed. The pick six they gave up to the Vikings, or the scoop and score, I guess it was. The 37 points they gave up to your Seahawks the week before. Their defense has not been as stout as I think we thought the Panthers defense could be. We knew their offense would struggle. Detroit looks very good right now. They're working on all cylinders. Their defense is even showing up right now. And Jared Goff has found a home in Detroit. And this is a home game for Detroit. Detroit, you talked about them in the preseason. They look really good right now. This one tees up nicely. I think it's a nice, easy win for Detroit. I think they're even going to cover the spread this week.
So we talked about Chicago recently. Now we get to talk about Detroit. Chicago last year picked up where they left off. They lost 10 straight. Now they lost 4 here. Detroit ended the last year 8-2. They ended strong, and they're continuing to play strong. I feel very good with a Detroit Lion victory here. My problem is not a fear of Carolina. It is the future value. It is significant. We've just ripped Chicago, right? They play, because they're in the division, they play Chicago twice. They also, no offense to your team, they host Las Vegas and they host Denver. So those are 4 premium games where you're losing out on it if you burn them here. At least something to consider. Let's go to the last game. Miami, 10.5 point favorites over the New York Giants. As a big Seattle fan, I watched every play of that Monday night game against the New York Giants. And I didn't think the New York Giants were a very good team to start with. Oh boy. Minus Saquon Barkley and their problems on the offensive line. The Seahawks came into that game after 3 weeks, 5 sacks. 1 game, 11 sacks. So, tell me, what do you think is going on the team last year that not only made the playoffs, but they got a win in the playoffs? What's going on?
Well, part of it's this offensive line, right? And, it just is a good reminder of how important. Actually, your Seahawks were also down offensive linemen last night. And you got to hand it to the offensive coordinator for making some adjustments to give a little bit of time, not much, a little bit of time to Geno Smith. If you have injuries to the offensive line, it's so impactful, and you can't adjust for it. I think the other thing is we're seeing, Jones's capability. I think some teams weren't able to adjust last year real time to his legs. The Giants had enough of an offensive line to where he had at least enough time to make a decision whether or not to use his legs. He didn't even have that amount of time in this game. I mean, he did use his legs. I think he had like 50 yards rushing. And even then, he was just beat to heck. It is a real problem to not have an offensive line. They are decimated at the offensive line level. Having Saquon Barkley back is not going to change anything. I can't believe you watched that game. It was such a bad game.
Oh, no. As a Seahawks fan, it was a great game. No problem. I loved it. So now, and this Miami team is now fully loaded with Jalen Waddle back. I don't see a scenario here where the Giants pull off an upset, which, might I add, I'd like to comment about one of the smartest teams in the NFL, the Miami Dolphins, of how they constructed their stadium. For years, even when they were bad, the Miami Dolphins have an advantage of being at home toward the beginning of the year. Why do I say that? Because earlier in the year, it is hot in Miami, and they've structured their stadium where the Dolphin sideline is in the shade and the opposition sideline is in the sun. And by the way, they're also more used to playing in this hot weather. So I always have said, from a survivor perspective, if you can utilize Miami at home earlier in the year, that's a great idea. So for that and all the other possible reasons we've talked about, I have no issues with a Miami pick this week.
Yeah, well, so let's talk about future value with them. So we already mentioned, if you have Kansas City and Buffalo, save them for this next week. Well, guess who you can save for this next week? If you don't have Kansas City and Buffalo, really good chance you don't have either, because, you know, that's how you survived this long. There's not a lot of great picks next week. You know, I guess that Philadelphia New York Jets game is tempting, but it's in New York, and New York can keep games close. Las Vegas at home in week 11. And the Jets at home in week 15. You know, if you don't have Kansas City and Buffalo, it's really tempting to save Miami for next week.
I really am glad you brought this up. Let's talk about that next week, because it's very hand in hand. One game that you might argue is an outlet, and I'm not sure how comfortable I am, and I want to get your opinion on that for next week, is the LA Rams at home. They should have Cooper Kupp back, because Cooper Kupp should come back this week, against Arizona, who's been, like you've mentioned, a feisty team. Would you feel comfortable putting your survivor life next week on the Rams?
Well, you know, I would want to watch what happens. If obviously see an injury or two on the Arizona side, I feel better about it. If you see Cooper Kupp come back and he's effective, I feel better about it. You know, the Rams looked really good in the first half of this game against Indianapolis last week, and then they all of a sudden, you know, fell apart. So no, I don't think so. I mean, with Arizona kind of being sneaky, you know, competitive right now, it being a division game, I wouldn't want to put it on the line with Arizona. So I would want to use Miami against Carolina next week.
All right, so let's have the discussion. I need to have a psychological therapy session with you, and I think we should have it in the comment section as a community. Let's all figure this out. So between these three games, right, between Miami and Detroit, where if you want to go kind of the safe route, or Washington, I would say to begin this discussion, a lot depends on how you got here. If you're somebody who's taken a lot of chances, so you have not picked a lot of the big name teams, I think this is a good week for you to relax, take Miami or Detroit. But if you've been picking the top favorites, like Baltimore, like Kansas City, like Buffalo, it's at least something where you need to think about where you make your move. What do you think, Michael? Is now the time to make the move to potentially pick Washington?
Well, I've already made the move a couple of times, and it didn't work out for me thus far. In fact, I think you know, I in one of my survivor leagues, I used the Commanders, which was week 1, which saved me from using Minnesota, like I did in this league, and so I don't have them available to me. But I do think you've got to take risk, especially in these bigger pools. And this is a great time to do so. I feel pretty good about this game. I think in a way, Denver did the Commanders a favor by letting the Bears get ahead and show people that they can compete. Yeah, there's some physical talent here. I think Ron Rivera will make sure this defense is ready for Justin Fields. And I think, like you say, somehow this offense is going to put up a fair amount of points against the Bears. It's going to be close. It's going to be uncomfortable. But the Commanders are going to get a win this week.
Well, I agree with the lines makers that I think Miami and Detroit have a much more likelihood to win, especially Miami. I do not see a scenario that Miami loses this week. And in fact, for what I said based on home field advantage, I am inclined to want to get rid of Miami. As good as they are, we see sometimes when they get on the road against a decent team, they could have some trouble. I'm inclined to use Miami now, or in the next 2 weeks. So it goes back to the question which I asked you, which is, look, if you're like me and you've used a lot of big favorites, you can pick Detroit this week, and you can go Miami next week. Safe route. However, you are burning a lot of really good teams, and I'm looking down the road at future value to win a pool of any size. I think you're going to start to have some challenges. In your league, you picked Washington. So I'm curious, given that you picked Washington, where do you go this week? Because I'm sure some people are in that boat.
Well, so because I hadn't chose either Kansas City or Buffalo at this point, I have them available to me. And so I would go with either Miami. I'd probably go with Miami this week, so that and then use one of those guys next week and not even, worry about it. So I'd go with Miami.
I'm not picking Miami because I like their future value, specifically next week. So my plan is to pick Miami at home against Carolina next week. And I'm just not comfortable with burning Detroit this week. I want to utilize them when they face Chicago one of those 2 times, or some of their other games. So it just opens up a lot of possibilities for me down the road. So I am finally going to take my stand, Michael, which means I fully admit I could be coming on to the show next week saying I'm out of Survivor, but we're still going to do our coverage. We're still going to do our coverage, folks, even if I get eliminated. But I am going to pick Washington this week on a Thursday night. I normally do not like playing Thursday night games, but if I get eliminated, I have a good story that I got eliminated by a team that has lost the last 14 games. So how could I feel bad about that? And by the way, one of the 14 games they lost was to the Washington Commanders last year. So in Chicago, this game is in Washington. Any final comments about what I think is a very interesting week 5?
No, you broke it down well, Eric. You didn't give a lot of confidence to the viewers who were thinking about the Commanders, so you kind of scared them off there. I like the disclaimer. I think you should be more confident going with the Commanders this week.
All right. Well, we want to hear what you guys think. Who are you going with this week, and why? And do you think we're crazy for considering the Commanders? We want to know what your thoughts are. Until next week, folks, take care, and we'll see you next time.
We're putting on the screen 2 videos that we think you would enjoy.